Anna, I'm so glad to be able to say that you're back for a second session with me. It's a pleasant surprise because the way that we ended it last time was more or less like, oh yeah, hopefully I can speak to you before the end of the year because of these plans I have and so on. So it's wonderful to have you back so soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me back. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, whenever you're listening to this.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're when we're recording this. I'm so happy to be back. I think I got so much overwhelmingly positive response from friends and even people that I didn't even know that well, from the research forum, from everybody. They really loved the first episode, so thank you to everybody who listened, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and share my thoughts and something about my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very positive experience to have because it helps to remind us that, we are each special to people, to others, and they value that. They value our thoughts. They value our experiences, and just for that reason, it's sometimes important to have these opportunities to express ourselves. And you do it so well. I don't really have to do anything, to be honest. So I just press record, and you do everything else. So
Thank you. Well, I
yeah.
have to say this is as a child I would have no problem being on the stage and dancing in front of hundreds of people. That was not an issue. If I had to speak on the stage, I would be petrified. I can do anything you want, just don't make me talk. And then now I was reflecting about this after the podcast, and I said, there we go. I've grown. I can see the trajectory going all the way up. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have these nerves. Yeah, I mean, I do remember once listening to an interview with a singer who probably had thousands of huge concerts under his belt, and he said, if you don't feel the butterflies in your stomach before you go on stage, that's when it's time to stop. So it's I don't think we should be afraid of that sense of fear. Perhaps it's a question of how we sort of learn to master it or learn to deal with it, essentially. So it's an inspiration.
Yes, I agree with that. I don't remember who said that to me early in life as well, but they said if you're not afraid of it, then it means you don't care. Um,
Mm.
if if you're not having any sort of emotions, and then you don't care, and then you probably shouldn't be doing it at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to have value, doesn't it? I mean, but in everything that we do, you can, for example, sit down and recite a poem, and you do so completely naturally. But put yourself into a situation where there are others listening to, where there is a heightened sense of anticipation, and suddenly the performance becomes emotional. The effect becomes more dramatic, and essentially all you've done is the very same thing, but the circumstances have changed. Yeah, and that sort of leads to a greater intensity, and from that can come wonderful experiences. But obviously there is the side effect of emotion and how we deal with it. So I haven't always dealt with it very well myself, I have to say. So you live, you learn, right?
Exactly, exactly. No, I think emotions should always be embraced rather than squashed and sort of forgotten. I think we live in a society where now it's a bit more acceptable in general to have an emotional side to everything that we do. But for so long, it was sort of like, oh, how dare you show any emotion, especially in, what I study is politics and all of that. And sort of the less human you are, the more professional you are in some way, which is weird to me, right? Because wouldn't you want your leaders and the people that are, leading the way for you, your children, and your future to be human, and for you to know that they care and that they also have problems and that they solve them and they grow? So yeah, I think in any scenario, some sort of showing of emotion and being honest about it is always better.
Yeah, and you highlight an interesting contradiction there because they as you say, people talk about the lack of emotion suggesting professionalism, that it suggests that you are, "Oh, men don't cry, toughen up, all this kind of thing. But on the other hand, when we talk about, for example, artificial intelligence perhaps being a decision-making a body for some kind of situation in the future, people say, no, 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 you need to have humans making decisions like that because you need the emotional element.
Absolutely.
A computer's unemotional. Oh, so it's okay for a computer to be emotional, or I suppose the idea, but
Mm,
people doesn't work.
absolutely. It's so weird. I know. I think Audre Lorde, I had to write a paper on her once, and I fell in love with her. Um, and one of her sort of articles or papers that she's written, she speaks about that. She speaks more from the feminist and sort of as a person of color. She was a black woman back in America, I think in the 50s. I might be lying, but I think it was the 50s when she was working the most. And she sort of wrote about how women should be angry and how you should utilize the anger because that's an emotion, that's a reaction to something, and then it grows into action, and then you start changing things. So she sort of even calls to be emotional and raw and not being afraid of it and not concealing it too much, being like, if this makes me angry, it means something is wrong and something has to change, but also sort of warns to not just stay angry, but also to transform this into action. Um, so I think, yeah, especially women have always been told that, if we are emotional, we're hysterical. If a man is allowed to be angry, a man is allowed to be jealous, a man is allowed to be every single emotion apart from empathetic. Empathetic means you're weak. Empathetic means you're, in today's world, you would say simp, right? Like you're simping for someone. You have no spine. You're not a real man because you're falling in love with someone and you empathize with someone, which to me is just such a backwards way of thinking. And sadly, it's set so deep into our society that it's very hard to change. And I see, like, even with my friends who are dear, and I know they don't mean anything, bad. There's still moments where I go, oh, there's the sort of underlying patriarchy still shimmering through, although these people genuinely are good people. So emotions are a big part of our lives, and I think we underestimate it.
So what's that word? Simp?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what the kids call, let's say, um, I don't even know if I'm getting this right, but sort of if you're simping for someone, you're sort of head over heels for someone, and you would do anything for this girl or whatever. So yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. So I thought that was alluding to somebody who was extremely empathetic, and I was going to say, okay, then that's me. But okay, no, no,
No, it's
no.
sort of being overly involved in it, or like overly. I don't even know how to explain it.
Okay.
Although it's basically being in love with someone and caring for someone, maybe broken down. But apparently for a man, that's not allowed in this society. So
Okay. All right. Well, that's a shame, isn't it? Because that means you sort of tend to miss out on the best that you can really get. Yeah. This thing about empathy, though, it's. I understand what you're saying, but I mean, if somebody asks me what my, I suppose, individual biggest sort of talent is, I'd say it's my ability to empathize. Because I really feel that if I sit down and listen to somebody for just a few minutes, that I hear and I feel,
hmm.
and I think that gives me an advantage because there are so many people who simply refuse to listen, refuse to put themselves in another person's shoes, and so therefore they come to the table with their preconceptual ideas that continues to dominate their thoughts without any consideration to perhaps changing their minds, and I find that so restrictive.
Absolutely. I mean, at this point, I would like to make sort of clear that I'm not speaking about every single man in the world. I'm speaking when I say men, I mean as a generalized sort of trend, same as if you say a woman, right? We don't mean every woman, you mean sort of the feminine, the masculine, what we see as a society. Just
Mm.
so if anyone wants to attack me now, I don't mean every single one of you. And also, if you do feel very attacked, I think you should rethink why in the first place.
Mm.
But yeah, I do agree with what you said that it sort of restricts you. And I think Elif Shafak, she has this amazing TED talk where she talks about circles and culture and storytelling. And she sort of says that we all have built up our walls around the things that are ours, and then stories make holes in those walls, and we suddenly can peek through to the other side and be like, oh, there's this and this on the other side, and I think that's the most amazing thing that can happen is you expanding your view, expanding your world. It doesn't mean that it changes your reality. It doesn't mean that, just because you're empathizing with someone doesn't mean that, you're immediately a good person or immediately, whatever. But I think it is such an important thing that this society is lacking in general, and it's been lacking for a very, very long time. If you look at the history, what we do to each other, how can a healthy, normal human being even do those things to other people? It's to me, I don't understand that.
Mm. And also to touch on what your apology for, you're not saying that to every man. Yeah, I believe that we should always be, mindful, respectful of the terms that we use and so on, but we shouldn't do this in a way which limits our freedom of speech. So if in the moment you feel to say, okay, men, because you're referring to more than one man that you have experienced, that no way reflects upon the entire masculine gender of the human race. So yeah, I don't like political correctness that goes so extreme that people feel that they cannot speak, and especially because this is what the right throws at people who are perhaps more positioned towards the left and say, oh, you don't want to allow freedom of speech, you want to control everybody, you want to create like a society that doesn't have any opinion. No, nobody's saying that.
Absolutely no. Actually, funnily enough, I think this sort of freedom of speech, the idea is that usually sort of women or maybe people from the LGBTQ plus community would be the ones to be like, hey, what you said is not quite right? Like being like, but funnily enough, when I talk about these issues, men who I talk with are the ones, well, you can't say that. You can't say that about all of us. And that's actually, I said it because of the men that have said something to me. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon going on in the
Mm.
society right now, where we're sort of, the blind leading the blind a little bit, where it's going.
Mm.
Let's hope. Let's hope that the bright minds of of your future, will persevere and sort of make this world a little bit better than it is.
Yeah, yeah. But also, I mean, in our first podcast, you talked about how you and other friends, you'd sort of decided that you would, if a male friend of yours said something, or if they saw something else happen, that you sat them down and you said, look, guys, this isn't the way it's got to be. You've got to do this. You've got to think about it this way, and so on. And life's about learning, and I'm pretty sure I can remember very clearly, actually, a couple of times, many years ago on Twitter, that I was in a conversation with a group of women, and they said, "Oh, men are this, men are that," and I said, "Look, I'm not like that, you know." And they said, "Well, if you're not like that, then why are you getting upset about it?" You know, in exactly the same way that you said. And I think people really need to understand that, women and other genders need to say that to people who feel, okay, I'm not represented by that group of men. But we need to go through that process of thinking, okay, then if you're not, then you don't have to be offended.
Absolutely, and I think it's always tricky to if you've acted one way, your whole life, and suddenly a 22-year-old goes to you and says, hey, actually you're being an incredibly toxic person towards this and this particular group of people, or especially women, which is like half of the society. um and and it's hard for you to hear. Obviously there's ego involved, which everybody has, not only men but also women have egos, or whoever, every person has an ego. And then obviously when it's challenged, when it's something that you've been sort of nearly taught by the society, when you see every other person that is similar to you acting the way you are acting, and suddenly you're supposed to change, for what? So it's sort of like, what do you mean I'm supposed to change? What do you mean I can't make these jokes anymore? But this is the thing, you need to, this is about empathy. To me, when I can deal with a certain amount of resistance, because I understand that infusing sort of change, this sort of massive change into someone's way of thinking, it doesn't just happen overnight. They have to understand, they have to sort of, absorb the idea, think it through in their own head with their own reality, and then they might change their ways. But to me, if that doesn't happen and it's sort of said over and over again and pointed out over and over again, I think then it's sort of, you're lacking empathy. I think that to me is the bottom line. What I said with empathy earlier is sort of, people do lack it quite a lot, and I see it all over the place. It's it's racism, it's homophobia, it's sexism, it's whatever you want to call it. To me, it's lack of empathy and lack of wanting to open yourself up to new possibilities and new ways of thinking.
But why do you think this happened? Because I'm pretty sure that towards the second half of the 20th century, now I know during the latter half of the 20th century, you were either not around for comment or you weren't particularly analytical at that stage, considering you were probably just born before the turn. But I do remember, I look back now at least and think, it really wasn't always this way. Yes, of course, these problems existed, because the problems of today didn't just turn up. They were always there, perhaps simmering beneath the surface, but it was never this bad. I never associated everything that happened in society with some kind of racist or sexist thought, maybe because I was so young. But do you think that perhaps this is the consequence of people no longer reading as much as they did before? Because nowadays there's so much by way of entertainment, mobile phones, streaming. There's no reading has taken a back burner. Because I remember an author once said that the best way to learn or to practice your empathy is by reading a book, because you automatically put yourself into the character's shoes as explained to you by the author. So you have to empathize to be able to read.
I think there's so many layers to your question, and I don't know if I'm even going to be able to explain, but I have like 7 different ideas to why it is as bad as it is. I think sort of to the beginning of the question, where you said, now sort of recently has gotten so much worse. I think it's just all come out to the surface. I think it was always there, but it's just all has come out to the surface because everybody has a voice, right? So all the victims have a voice, and all the sort of aggressors have a voice too. And both can organize themselves. We saw what happened in Capitol at the beginning of the year. All the Trump people wanting to storm or storm the Capitol. Previously, I think it would have not been as easy to organize that sort of spontaneous event, more or less, than now. And it's easier to spread these hate messages, right? Because, even my mom, bless her, she told me this like one thing about how passwords on websites are not secure because something and something. And I was just sitting there going, you read an article that is just simply not true. And she believed it, although she's an incredibly intelligent woman. So it can happen to everybody. But I think if you especially social media, it creates echo chambers. We have echo chambers in our lives. You sort of say one thing, and the friends that you have around you, you don't really have many people that will challenge your views dramatically, right? So you surround yourself with people who think like you, who have similar views. That's just sort of natural, and it's happened all the time. But now with social media, the algorithm is able to keep feeding you the things that you are clearly interested in. So, and someone who's on the verge between right wing and left wing, if they have viewed a few more posts about, Trump or any other right wing sort of party or whatever country it is, suddenly this person is getting bombarded by the feed is full of this content, and obviously it sucks you in. It's the same if if you want to test this, just go open YouTube and type in something and then see where the videos take you. Just the next video, next video, next video, and it will take you down such a rabbit hole. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's just so out there. It's because everybody can share it, and everybody has a laptop, everybody has a phone. Even my grandmother, she has a laptop and she goes down rabbit holes on her own. So everybody is, and there's this lack of like, how do we navigate this social media, this social place, this internet, right? We don't have the skills. We are taught to, in school, I was taught how to make a painting, but I was not taught about how do you navigate the internet. And I think that's the most important thing that should be taught in schools nowadays, is how do you navigate this space? How do you sort of see what information is legit, what information is false. It's something that in university is very emphasized, because obviously we want to write academic articles and you can't just use bogus websites. But then on the other hand, it can also be limiting, saying, okay, so we're just using BBC. BBC is such a, propaganda machine as any other massive media. How do you, what do you do? Because it is a tricky thing, because everybody pushes their own perspective, and then one say, oh, this is acceptable. The others say, no, this is acceptable. This is the right thing. No, that is the right thing. So there's a conflict within even who's right? Like whose voice is the one that is right. But then this morning I saw a video that, for example, said the word homosexual was introduced in the Bible in 1946. I don't remember exactly what. It was sort of a group of white Christian men who were sort of, anti-gay in their spirits, and they sort of mistranslated to a certain extent on purpose the Bible and certain verses of the Bible, which were sort of saying, condemning basically men who were unfaithful or not good leaders, and men who were having sexual relations with boys. That was sort of the thing, was sort of like a pedophile is not okay, and a man who's abusing his family and his or his community. That's sort of what the Bible says. But then it was mistranslated into homosexual, which then was mistaken by, let's say, and then it was sort of said it's a sin to be gay, which is actually not really true. It's not actually written in the Bible. And on the other hand, there's no mention of women as in lesbian. There's no mention of that. So there's only hate for men having sex with men, which is, if they meant it being gay is a sin, they would have included all of it. So there is this thing that there's man-made hate that is sort of blasted all over the society, and it just takes up in momentum and then becomes part of the society to a certain extent, which is horrible in my opinion. And then going even further back, I think that a lot goes back to the Christian church. A lot of, for example, witches were burned because they were doing paganism, which is basically half of the holidays in the Christian church are the same as pagan holidays, or they celebrate basically the same things across many religions. But, because it was a woman who had power, who had knowledge, she was burned because she was dangerous. So, all of these things, they have very, very deep roots, and I'm just addressing, so, I by no means am an expert on this, but this is sort of the first things that came to mind.
Yeah, you you've sort of scattergunned so much information at me. I wouldn't know where to start. No, I think a lot of what you say is absolutely true. I mean, just to give a few examples to support that. The Persian god of war, I think Mithras, was born on the 25th of December, and he had 12 generals or 12 followers or something like that. Is that reminiscent of somebody?
Yeah.
Dionysius, I think it was, who turned water into wine. As you say, there are certain things which were taken from previous belief structures which allowed for the smooth transition from one to the other. And so on. But also the BBC, which you don't like. Well, Andy, I don't know if you may like it, but
I'll be honest about it. I despise them as an organization. Absolutely. Okay. And my university was right next to BBC Broadcasting, and every time I passed that building, I just thought, you liars.
Okay, that's okay. I mean, hey, we're allowed to have differing opinions. I actually like the BBC. Maybe the World Service operates on a different wavelength to the daily news that you see.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. What is interesting though is I listened to a BBC podcast, so their history podcast, and they had this a lady on who had done research. She had basically gone through, I don't know, decades, back over 100 years of newspaper articles tracing opinions on homosexuality throughout the last sort of 150 odd years within the UK. And she came to very similar conclusions that you did. Basically, after the Second World War, things became far more conservative. The church became far more influential within this kind of belief because the war had devastated everything. Nobody knew what who was in charge, what were the authorities. So therefore, they sort of grabbed a hold of the church as this superior belief structure. And the church turned people to a certain direction, which was essentially this, the classic sort of family setup, heterosexual families, the man, the patriarchal, position in society, the woman, sort of stays at home, looks after the kids, and so on. But before that, before the Second World War, and even before the First World War, society was far more liberal.
Absolutely. And I think you can also see this if you look at the greatest, thinkers in a way. I'm reading a lot about existentialism. That should also be Raoul's fault. He indoctrinated me he called me an existentialist 2 years ago, and I didn't even know exactly what it meant. And then he's been feeding me all this information and this knowledge, and I'm like, actually, I think you're right. I think you diagnosed me right. But even back then they speak about all of these taboo subjects that we have today to a certain extent so freely, and they discuss it. And obviously it's still a tricky subject, or it's sensitive, but all of the greatest thinkers that we still reference today, not saying Socrates or Plato or something, not that ancient, but sort of that happens sort of in the times between sort of just pre-First World War and just sort of until mid-Second World War. And then after that, it just cuts off like a knife, right? It becomes so much stricter, as you said. And also I was thinking I heard something else about how in the United States, I don't know if this is true, but it's an interesting thought that the right-wing sort of, or Christian right-wing politics, why they're so against abortion is because I think they said 57%, not that must be a lie, I don't remember the actual number, but sort of saying that the abortion rates amongst white women are much higher than amongst people of color. And then basically this sort of nearly Hitler-esque idea of a certain way of how to stay, how to have a pure society, which I obviously don't agree with. but sort of saying if you ban abortion, you are going to have more white children because, you know, the United States have so many immigrants and so many different people and cultures, and they're sort of afraid that the white Christian family will disappear, which to me is honestly ridiculous. But also that would make sense if if the church suddenly becomes so much stricter after the Second World War because we have lost so much of our population, and then you go, you know, we're going to say that gay anything is wrong to encourage people to have families, to have children, to not use protection, to, you know, produce as much as you can. So I don't know. Maybe it sounds like a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's true. Who knows? But it's definitely a very interesting topic that has been widely discussed, I think, all over the world.
It's definitely not beyond the realms of possibility, right? As in, you know, these kinds of, I mean, these things which people so easily dismiss as conspiracy theory. So many of these things are bound actually in fact, in real possibilities. And just because there is no, you know, I don't have a tape recording of a certain person saying this doesn't mean it wasn't said. And I think too much is dismissed as conspiracy theory, especially when there are facts to back them up. And if you look at the medical, yes, go on.
No, I just wanted to say that it's the easiest way to discredit an argument. You just say you're insane. And how are you going to argue within, you know, you're insane? How can you argue? You can't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you could just, you know, grow your hair long and go crazy, be like Einstein and stick your tongue out. But I mean, if you look at some of the medical statistics, which talks about the birth rates, successful pregnancies, and so on, you know, it is very much skewed towards your average sort of white family, and you know. Women of color have, you know, long since, you know, observed this, identified this, the difference of care, the difference of attention that they receive. You know, this isn't something which some person has, you know, sat in a classroom and thought, oh, do you know what, I'm going to talk about this today. No, this is real life, you know, on the streets. This is happening. And the fact that, you know, it can be even considered possible to dismiss this topic or even these kinds of arguments is offensive, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a woman, I am facing so many things in the world, right? But women of color, I mean, I always shut up if they have anything to say. I just go, yes, speak. I'm here to listen. I have so much easier than you do, and I'm so aware of that. And yeah, this typical thing, even in general, I think women are given much less. I think there was this woman who said she gave birth and she had horrible complications, and she was given like 3 days worth of painkillers, and her husband, he sprained his wrist and he was given painkillers for 2 weeks. She's like, excuse me, I just gave birth and I had horrible complications. My whole body's in shreds. And it's sort of that, she was like, you know, we've all heard of this, that women are always sort of, you know, that women's pain have always been minimalized to like, oh, you're overreacting or you're hysterical. And then she's like, there is the example, 2021, there is the example how differently we are treated, right? So who do you blame? Do you blame the doctor, the nurse, the society, the systematic, whatever, you know, what do you do? How do you address this? How do you change it?
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly this is, there are levels, it would appear, of priorities that have to be followed, you know, with regards to these structures. You know, in every country you see that there is a prioritization towards the male, because the male is considered to be the more productive, the one that brings in the most money, is the most useful.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously other men are giving other men more money. When women are asking for the same amount of money, they just say no, and then they say we're more important than you because we get more money, which they have created themselves. It's just hilarious to me.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It's yeah, in many ways you can say, yeah, I'd agree that there are, you know, it is funny in its stupidity, because people believe that they can get away with it. For example, Dominic Cummings saying he had an eye problem, or he couldn't see properly, so he drove his family 400 miles in a cart because he obviously couldn't see what he was doing. So, the fact that people, swallow this shit, it's in itself quite crazy. But yeah,
Very concerning. Very concerning.
Absolutely. But that would also be a conspiracy theory, right? So we shouldn't really talk about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Quickly, we get an email from one of the secret services saying you need to shut up.
Yeah, but then we can read it out.
Exactly.
And that will make us even more popular as an episode.
We have found the perfect formula for fame.
Absolutely. Well, you will get there much quicker than I will, but that's nothing new. I guess I walk so slowly nowadays. But this is the longest introduction that I've done to a podcast. We haven't even touched any of the topics. But before we jump into topic number one, congratulations are in order on your degree. You received your diploma.
Yes, I did. Actually, I knew the grade for a very long time. I knew I had successfully written my dissertation and gotten a first on it, and then I knew if I get a first in my dissertation, I will also receive a first class mark for my degree. Which I have a first in international relations. And I'm honestly very happy, and I'm so happy I went to University of Westminster. I mean, I wouldn't be speaking to you today if I hadn't gone there, end of the day. So it's been an incredible experience. And so currently I'm applying to masters in diplomacy and foreign affairs to sort of deepen my already knowledge that I have. It's more theoretical. And so the studies that I plan to do are a little bit more, you learn the skills of mediation a little bit more, and conflict resolution and stuff like that. So let's see where it leads me, hopefully towards a PhD one day. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, because also you speak Russian, right?
Yeah, so I do understand completely everything, I'd say. Reading and writing is a bit harder. And I could speak easily, but I choose not to speak because I have an accent and I don't like the accent. So I don't speak. But then because I don't speak, the accent doesn't get better. So I'm in this hell loop of wanting to speak and get better, but not speaking because I'm a perfectionist and I don't do anything if I'm not good at it. So
okay, interesting.
Something I need to work on.
Yeah, so it seems. Okay, but because I only mention that because it definitely opens up certain channels for you. The relations or diplomatic relations between the West and Russia are not exactly amicable at present. So there could be. There are always possibilities for people who have a sense of diplomacy, who are intelligent, and also you speak both languages. Really cool tool to have in your toolbox.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that I've been thinking about as well. And maybe that won't be a surprise to any of the listeners, but I'm also not an absolute Russia hater, like so many in the West are. So, in university, I've always been sort of some people are like, "Oh, Putin has brainwashed you personally," and I said, "Oh, I wish, because I would love to meet the man. I think he's incredibly interesting." So yeah, I've always been interested in sort of what's going on in Russia and how Russia is seen in the Western media and sort of in the West in general. It's quite interesting. Me and Raouf have many conversations about this. So.
Well, I mean, I'm firmly of the opinion that there is no right and wrong in politics, but also in life. I think over the years I've solidified this concept a bit more. If we accept that there is no such thing as right and wrong, then we perhaps finally can conclude that life is by no means binary, and that there is an eternity with regards to the variations that can exist between two polar opposites. But we just go to the polar opposites because they're easier for us to understand.
Absolutely.
And that's unfair, isn't it, on society?
It's incredibly unfair. And this goes even back to gender, now that you said binary. I remember talking to you earlier, I think last week, and I sort of told you that in certain native cultures, I think Native Americans, which is like, I think in Europe we more know more about Native Americans than other native cultures. But I think even in Maori, I really don't want to lie about this, but they even say, for example, they don't have a word for gendered word for aunt or auntie or uncle. You know, they have one word that means, you know, the sibling of the parent. And they sort of speak about how they don't really subscribe to these typical gender roles. And same with Native Americans, right? Like you hear so many things where they say, oh, these practices, they're gender fluid. We don't really subscribe to it. And it's interesting to me that it seems that more like older cultures, older societies, they seemed to take this subject of gender much more easier, and it was seen as much more fluid, whereas now our society is sort of reached the other extreme, and now we're fighting for it to go back to how it was. And that's seen as something very forward and very liberal and forward thinking and sort of new, and how dare you, the tradition is man and a woman in a marriage, where actually if you look at history that might not even be that true. So yeah, I do agree with that. Nothing in this life is just this or that. I think everything is sort of in a grey area, nearly everything, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, but grey is an unfortunate colour to put in. So maybe it's sort of sunlit, and possibilities are there, and it's up to each. Yeah,
I like that too.
Yeah, because grey sounds boring. I mean, even though grey is the new black, some people say, other people say brown is the new black. I don't know really, to be honest.
It depends on the season.
Yeah, it could be. Could be. I'm definitely not a fashionista, so I'm not the person to talk about this too much. Though I do like shopping, so that does make me slightly strange.
Retail therapy is the best way of therapy.
Oh, I tell you, yeah, but it's great to be able to go into shops again and sort of feel the material before you make a purchase. But
I know. I got a wonderful dress. We went, me and my partner, we went out for the first time to Night Tales here in London. Didn't stay too long. But then outside there in Hackney, they have these tiny stalls of like different, CBD gummies and dresses and whatnot, different things. And I saw this beautiful dress and I got it, or my partner got it for me. So I was very happy. And it felt so, it felt like, oh my God, for this one moment, it felt like a normal life again, where you come to a club and you buy a dress,
yeah.
How has this happened that for 2 years nearly we haven't had this? It felt so bizarre.
Yeah, how is it going at the moment in the UK? I don't want to turn this completely to a conversation about Corona, but obviously reading the news there, I mean, cases in Germany are going up as well. So I don't want to say, oh, we're better than, so there's none of that. But how is it going at the moment in the UK?
I haven't been keeping up much with the news because at this point, COVID is there. I still wear a mask everywhere I go. But the restrictions have been lifted. I think officially sort of the lockdown has finally been lifted. Everything is open. Everybody is out and about. The streets are busy. Yesterday I was in Soho. Every shop was filled with people. But I think the cases are still rising, and I think it was quite funny because I knew this is going to happen. After the Euros final, 2 weeks, exactly 1.5 weeks after, the cases like doubled or tripled or something, and I was like, yeah, well, what did you expect when you let everybody roam around crazy and get drunk and do whatever? So yeah, I think they are sort of afraid to tell people, hey, actually we need to continue to be careful and to not just go around and completely ignore the fact that this virus is still around, because people are just so starved for entertainment, for anything exciting. Nobody can stand being at home anymore. So yeah, I think it's they are mismanaging the situation as usual.
I mean, I've often said that humans are naturally social creatures. So, it's not natural that the majority of humans would seek seclusion or would seek isolation. That doesn't happen. We tend to levitate towards one another, or gravitate towards one another. I'd love to levitate, but we tend to gravitate towards one another, and we create these communities because we also find safety in numbers, and this has been sort of a focal point in the development of human society. So therefore, when governments come out and say, people need to come out again, they need to go back to their normal lives, there is a certain sense that I appreciate. However, what is the actual motivation behind that? Because we did say that we wanted to talk a little bit about capitalism, and maybe this is a good opportunity to do so. Because surely, what is the point of building up capital if you're not alive to spend it?
No. Yeah, I do agree with that. I'm not saying, everybody should be kept in cages until this blows over. I do understand the other side as well, of course, but I think it's the actual measures that they're taking, right? And since the beginning, it was clearly the priority was saving businesses, not saving lives, right? Rather than giving, even Jeff Bezos, he cut people's wages during the pandemic when he was making more money than ever before. How does that make sense?
He had to pay for the rocket fuel.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
He says thank you to all the customers and his employees.
Yeah, I mean that's a piss take, isn't it?
Public opinion of him. How can you be this delusional? I mean, if you're the richest man on earth and you have so much money that you could literally buy the world, I guess you don't care. But yes.
Yeah, I think that says it really. Yeah, more than unfortunate. Choice of words from Mr. Bezos. I can't. I mean, the thing is, he said it with, he started smiling and laughing. The people with him started laughing too. But I kind of sensed an awkward laughter there, and people thought, yeah. "Oh God, what did you just say?"
Absolutely. It's sort of when your creepy uncle who, did jokes about the crime in a way. It's like, haha, funny, but we all know what you're doing.
Yeah. That's a great way of referring to Jeff Bezos. I don't know if anybody's actually called him a creepy uncle before.
I'm glad to be the first one. Have you heard his laugh? His satanic, evil character out of a, I don't know, Marvel movie. His laugh is just evil. It's a typical laugh of a sort of villain character. It's fascinating how it fits his personality so well.
Okay, I'm going to write a book with a creepy uncle, and I'm going to base it on Jeff Bezos. I think not because he's bald, because I'm getting there myself, so I've got no problem with bald people. But this attitude that he has is just sickening. Anyway.
And I mean, that reflects the attitude of capitalism in general, right? Like, it's about everybody fighting for themselves, but also being taken advantage of by whoever is a bit richer than you. And then there's, as I said, there's lack of empathy. There's lack of all of that. That's why professionalism, as we said in the beginning, the less human you are, the more professional you are somehow. And that's what capitalism is all about. Is you just you work until you drop, and then you go home, you eat, you sleep, and then you go back to work. And that's somehow supposed to be natural for humans. I mean, how is that natural? Even about, like, I've thought about this so much. Is I saw a statistic, I think last evening, that said that the sort of the boomers, the baby boomers, the generation in the United States, they're hoarding about 57% of the wealth, right? And millennials have about 5%. Gen X has like 20 something or 30 something, and Gen Z is not even on the statistics. Also don't have any capital.
Yeah. So. Congratulations for being so upwardly mobile.
Yeah. And and that's it. Like, this idea of it, we have progressed to the point where you can work 4 jobs and still not be able to afford to buy enough food and live a normal, dignified life, right? Where before, in the American dream, your husband works a job 9 to 5 and is able to feed a whole family, buy a car, buy a house, and take you on a vacation in the summer. How have we gone from that wage to everybody works and nobody can afford anything?
Yeah, I mean the property market explosion from the 80s on, where essentially sort of people were pushed through this through monetarism or Reaganism as they call it in the US, I think, to basically investing in properties in a sort of mass way, and establishing personal capital from that perspective, and then thereafter in itself, the home became that huge vehicle for economic expansion, and I have a feeling that's also what led to the crash in 2008, 2008. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, if I think in the 80s you could basically get a mortgage, which was like, I don't know, 2 or maybe 3 to 1 your ratio with your salary. But right now, I mean, house prices or flat prices are basically 10 times the average wage. In certain areas, it's even more, depending on the kind of property, obviously. So it's it is absolutely impossible to have a normal life. Yeah.
I mean, that's neoliberalism that you sort of spoke about. Maybe people know that term more than Reaganism, but Thatcher was involved in this as well. And they started the first ever experiment that they did. It was in '73 in Chile when they organized the coup, the Americans, and then they sort of started the neoliberalist experiment and expanded it all across the world, especially also after the Soviet Union collapsed. They expanded it to former Soviet countries, which is called the shock doctrine. Actually, if anyone's interested, there's also a book by Naomi Klein discussing this, because this goes not only to personal sort of experiences of, I'm not able to buy a house. I, as a nearly 3-year-old, I know I will never probably be able to afford a house. I know that that's something that is so far out of my reach that I shouldn't even be putting down as a goal, which is the reality for most people, right? But
unfortunately, yeah.
Exactly. But this privatization of everything is, they say, oh, well, we privatize everything. If you work hard, you can afford everything. That's not an issue, but that's just not how it works. So that's why, for example, to me, Germany is a great example, because you have a socialist democracy, right? So you still have capitalism and you have, the private sector, but you also have the state who catches you. That's the social part of it, right? If you're unemployed, you will always be able to have a house and have some food. That's what they do. They give you the bare minimum to give you at least an attempt at a dignified life. If you don't want it, you don't have to have it, right? You can decline all of it and you don't have to get money from the government. But to me, that's what it should be, right? We look out for the weakest links in our society and we all grow together, rather than just the split is just ridiculous at this point. How, the top 1%, how much they own, right? Like 99% of of the whole wealth is owned by 1%, right? By 30 something people. I mean, how is that real? How is that the society we live in? I don't know how people can completely blindly support capitalism. It hurts everybody. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, but this is a part of the sort of misconception that we have as we grow up. I mean, capitalism refers to, I believe, the individual growth of property assets and capital, and yet in many ways what we're referencing is corporatism. Where you've got these sort of vast organizations which build up wealth at an astronomical level, and the individuals cannot in any way compete with that. So the bigger and bigger these multinationals, these corporates become, the more powerful, the more influential they are. So any kind of government that has designs on expansion of any sort, whether that is trade or military, they have to go to these same corporates, because these corporates.
I've done whole research on this actually in my last year of university. It's called UK Unreducted, And it's a continuation of a previous research that one of my professors, Dr. Sam Raphael, did. And I was one of the students working on this, and we actually looked at how the UK is involved with Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and who gets the contracts, how they're done, how the licensing works, and and the UK is always like, oh, we're not involved in any wars, and then they're literally supplying like 80% of the guns that are used in Yemen by Saudi Arabia. And they say, oh, we're not involved at all. So it's, it goes to every single aspect of our lives. It's the same sort of process. You go to the big guy to go to the big dog, and they got even more powerful and richer. And then the rest of us lose, basically.
Yeah, and the higher up you go, the contacts between the two, or the people, as it were, these elites becomes closer and ever more intertwined. So, I mean, this is a bit like the old military doctrine, where you never took out the officers, you only took out the soldiers, because the officers essentially, they could be cousins, they could be business partners. At the very least, they're people of value who you can sort of trade back. But the little people, the soldiers, fire at will, basically.
Kanonenfutter. As as the German term Kanonenfutter, which is basically cannon food.
Cannon fodder.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a weird place, this world. There's a lot wrong with it.
Yeah, there is a lot wrong with it, isn't it? But I mean, we wanted to also, talk about something positive, and I think it's good to end on a positive note as well. So, in our notes, we wanted to talk about our relationships with, our interactions and experiences with, non-binary groups. So because this was basically inspired by your previous talk with me, when you were talking about your dance experiences in Germany and the group, and they made you feel so welcome. And it was also something that I experienced in one of my sort of teaching groups specifically, but also with every sort of homosexual that I have spoken with. So friendly, so open, understanding. Whenever I've spoken with, there was once I had a homosexual student in Parma, and he used to come to my home. We used to have our lessons and so on. And a few months later, after the course had stopped, I saw him in the street, and he was looking at me from the corner of his eye. Because he didn't know how I would react. So I made a point. I called out his name from across the street, and I went over and gave him a big hug. And he was so happy. And I just feel that's the natural thing to do. I mean, how would you go about things?
I think to me, who you're sleeping with is like, I couldn't care less. I mean, you do you. You do you. I'm not the one to be here sitting judging you as a person on your sexual preference. And I think these communities, sort of not only let's say gay people, but these communities in general, they're so welcoming because they understand how it is when you're discriminated against, and when you're misunderstood, and when you're being, taken for what you're not, and you're only judged on one part of your personality rather than who you are actually. And I think that's why these communities are so open and so welcoming, is because they just know how it feels to be left out, out in the cold. To me, in general, I mean, if you're a shitty person, you're a shitty person. But my experience with sort of the LGBT community has been overwhelmingly positive, and as I said, extremely welcoming, and just so pure usually, because I think they're also just so sick of putting up a mask to the rest of the society oftentimes. So if you can, it's the same for me. If I can connect to somebody who understands me and is not judgmental towards me, I will be much sort of more open and lively and share so much more of myself and my personality than with someone who's there judging me. Or, you know, I have this all the time where in university, or some male professors would look at me in the beginning being like, oh, you're the blonde girl, you know, you're the I always for me, I always try to look sort of nice, not for men but for myself, contrary to the belief of the world. Women actually get ready for themselves.
Mm.
And, you know, I do that for myself, and then they sort of misjudge me and underestimate me a lot. And I'm like, well, just because I look a certain way doesn't mean my brain isn't functioning, doesn't mean I'm not an intellectual person, right? So in a way, I see it as like, well, thank you. It makes my job easier, because it's so much easier to prove you wrong and surprise you, because you're already underestimating me so much. And I think it's similar with sort of all marginalized communities, where you just go, why are you judging me on something that you don't even have a right to judge me on? You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I find friendliness, to be honest, an honest, sincere friendliness to be the absolute most disarming way to approach new people. You know, to simply, assume that a group of people will be defensive, will be unwelcoming. You know, that creates awkwardness and difficulty, and unnecessarily sort of prolongs unity. Whereas if you approach a group with a smile, it's so different.
And I think the most important thing that I've learned in London is, I had a situation where I'm not going to go too much into detail, because these are people that I'm actually very close with now. But there was a time where I was sort of made believe that I had to change who I was a little bit, or at least filter myself in order to fit into a certain group. And actually, it turned out that I just had to be myself. And now, where I've learned this and I've understood it, I have these amazing friends who are all from this group. And that's what I've learned, is sort of, contrary to whatever anyone says, be you, and then it's going to be easy. Because in the beginning, when I was sort of pretending to filter myself, or not being fully me, they also didn't really like me, because they were like, well, clearly something's up with her, right? Like, so she's something is not really right, because I wasn't being true to who I am. So yes, I think people should really try to keep their judgments to themselves, until they have actually spoken to the person, and then you can determine if you can click with them or not. But yes.
Well, there is this saying, isn't it? If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. I mean, that shouldn't only be about making money or winning races and stuff. That should also be about trying to understand people, making friends.
Exactly. It sort of transpires all. It takes you into every single level of your life, I think. Just be unapologetically you, and don't harm anyone with that. But, be you, and then it's going to be so much easier for everybody involved, and you're going to find your people so much quicker when you're actually you, and you don't put up with a group of people that you actually don't really care about, or you can't connect with. So that would be my advice.
Definitely, yeah, and don't prolong the inevitable. So, I mean, if it's not your group, your groups are everywhere. They just need to be identified.
Absolutely. I mean, I have so many friends and people I know that I absolutely love, but my fate is nobody is in London. I mean, I have loads. But if I talk about my best friends, one of them is in Thailand, the other one is back in Latvia. I have friends in Mexico, or I have friends who, like, we meet and we're like, oh my God, you're so amazing. We're going to be such close friends. And then she moves back home to Jordan. That's my fate personally. I hope whoever listens to this, you have your friends much closer to home, or wherever you are. But, yeah.
Absolutely. I think the true wealth, or human wealth, is in the relationships that we create, and that we can help to grow.
Absolutely. That's sort of what I've also realized is not what you know, it's who you know. And it doesn't only sort of work in work situations or, you know, for you to get a good interview or whatever, because that's usually said in London, you know, oh, if you want to get a job, it's about who you know. But I think
Mm.
it's also true in life in general. It's not about what you've learned or what you know, it's about the people you're surrounding yourself with. They are the reflection of you. We also should always remember that if a relationship is not necessarily working out, what is the part that you are playing in it? Because the relationship doesn't just, you know, go one way. There's two people involved.
At least.
At least, exactly. So yeah, a little bit of a philosophical approach to friendship, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean it's harmless, and also, communicate, talk. When in doubt, ask a question. It doesn't take rocket science. If you have a pre-existing relationship with a person because you've been friends, if the shit hits the fan, they're acting strangely, ask what's going on. Can I help? Doesn't hurt.
Absolutely. I think in general, we people are just so concerned about what people are going to think about us when we say this or do that. And I think it's just, we all should take ourselves a little bit less seriously. And I say this to myself as much as I say this to anyone else, actually, right now. Yeah, it's, you know, just take a step back and reevaluate what's going on and take care of the people you love. That's the most important thing, I think.
Absolutely. And before I bring down the curtain on yet another fantastic talk with you, Anna, I have a small bone to pick, which I think I hope that I'm not completely false in saying this, but I've been looking forward to a new blog post from you, but unfortunately I haven't found one.
Yeah, so it's been a bit crazy in my life right now. I've absolutely not been focused on writing. I'm writing my personal statement for my dissertation right now, so all my creative and academic writing skills are going into that right now. But I do promise there's a post coming very soon. I also have my birthday on Saturday, so this weekend I'm going to be busy celebrating. Thankfully, the COVID restrictions is allowing me and my friends to sort of get together for a little party. Thankfully, most of us are also vaccinated, so please don't come at me that I'm irresponsible. That's not the case. Um, but yes, I will post something soon. I promise.
Good, 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 good. All right, Anna, thank you very much. It's refreshing to be able to speak so frankly and about such emotional subjects as well. So thank you very much for coming back, and I hope it won't be the last time. We'll chat many, many more times.
Oh, we definitely will. I think we will always have something to discuss. So thank you for having me on here, and thank you for giving me the platform to share my opinions and voices. And I'm just incredibly glad that it does resonate with people. Makes me feel better about myself and makes me feel like I'm not delusional and I'm not crazy.
Which is always good to know, right?
Yeah, it's always
Yeah.
nice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Till next time.
Two and a mic. Two.